The best leaders are those that people hardly know exist. The next best is a leader who is loved and praised. Next comes the one who is feared. The worst one is the leader that is despised. If you don't trust the people, they will become untrustworthy. The best leaders value their words and use them sparingly. When she has accomplished her task, the people say, "Amazing, we did it all by ourselves." So obviously this chapter is all about leadership. The Tao Te Ching offers a lot of these commentaries on leaders and the traits they ought to emulate. Now, when we read passages like this, it can be tempting to assume that they apply to others. For example, when we read passages about good leadership, we often jump straight to thinking things like, "Wow, I wish my boss would read this," or "Hey, our politicians certainly aren't doing this." However, such thoughts lead to little benefit in our own lives. Since we have no power to control the actions of our bosses and our politicians, we are much better served to ask what we can take from the passage to benefit our own lives. In reality, almost all of us will experience some kind of authority at some time or another. The amount of so-called prestige that goes along with your position is irrelevant. If you're a parent, teacher, older sibling, or even a friend to somebody, this passage applies to you. If you really don't feel like you're in a position of leadership over anybody, this passage is still relevant to you, because there's still somebody that you govern every day, the person you call yourself. Besides, these days, many of us have an opportunity to participate in the election of our leaders through voting. Therefore, we are well served to be able to distinguish between good and bad leaders, so that we can make more informed decisions. Now, I personally love nothing more than a little bit of history, and so as I was contemplating this passage, I was trying to think of some good examples of leaders from each category outlined in the passage. Well, obviously, it's pretty easy to come up with examples from the last three categories, but honestly, I feel like giving examples from those is kind of pointless, because you've probably already thought of several examples by yourself without having to be reminded. However, when I tried to think of examples of the first category, great leaders, I had a much harder time with it. The reason for this is pretty obvious. After all, according to the passage, one qualification for a great leader is that people take them for granted and barely realize that they are there. By nature, this would mean that great leaders are textbook victims of survivorship bias. I mean, if one shared quality of all great leaders is that people usually don't realize that they're great, then this makes the task of pinning them down pretty hard. So with that in mind, at this point, I suppose we will just stick to describing great leaders in the hypothetical sense for now. Although if you guys can think of anyone that fits this bill, I would love to hear it. Leaders that perform their duties without concern for what people think about them are pretty uncommon. At the end of the day, we all want to be affirmed. And when serving in a leadership capacity, it can be very tempting to look at this capacity as an opportunity to get that affirmation. I also wonder if it's possible that our fear of being forgotten is an extension of our fear of death, which we talked about yesterday. There is a popular saying out there that a person only truly dies when everybody has forgotten him. However, as we talked about yesterday, to the master, death is not a thing to be feared, but rather a natural part of the cycle of nature. When a person practices disinterested love for all those around him or her, there's no need to be worried about dying, because they're not worried about the self. A master doesn't mind if nobody knows what he does, because he wasn't doing it to be noticed. He is happy with his role, and the fact that he is able to provide utility to others by fluidly exercising his own personal talents. His satisfaction with his work in the present moment is enough for him, so he's not worried about the future. If his duties necessitate laying plans for work to be done in the future, he lays his plans, regarding the planning of tomorrow's duties as today's duty, and then puts them aside and returns his attention to the work to be done now. He puts great trust in those around him. He gives second chances when it seems that people don't deserve them. He discerns the talents and passions of those around him, gives them things to do that coincide with these talents, and trusts them to complete them without micromanaging. He doesn't give long speeches for the sake of hearing himself talk. Often when we lead, we are tempted to spell out every detail for people, but the master does not do this. He uses his words sparingly, giving the people he leads ample opportunity to follow their own intuitions and come to conclusions on their own, understanding that this will enable their learning far better than anything he could say. When he does teach, he says a lot by saying only a little. He chooses his words carefully, and they are the sort of words you could ponder for days. Because he has removed himself from the center of everything and enabled his people to think and act for themselves, when something is achieved, the people feel a sense of accomplishment and power. They may not even realize his role in bringing the thing to pass at all, but the master is okay with this, because he was never in it for the glory anyway. He can feel a sense of satisfaction for what has been done, and then joyfully move on to the next thing. He can marvel at his own work and appreciate it as objectively as if it were done by somebody else. He is the sort of person that could build the best building in the world and know that it's the best, and rejoice in it as disinterestedly as he might rejoice in a sunrise or in a piece of music. He is in the process of detaching from the illusion of self and finding himself as one with all things, including the people he leads. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow for Chapter 18. Peace and blessings.